Number 1. Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald is one of the most scrutinized and controversial figures in American history, a man whose actions reshaped the nation in a matter of seconds. On the morning of November 22, 1963, Dallas was preparing for a celebratory presidential visit. President John F. Kennedy's motorcade moved slowly through Dealey Plaza, waving to crowds as it passed beneath the Texas Schoolbook Depository. Few people noticed a quiet, 24-year-old former Marine working inside the building. A man who had already lived a life marked by instability, radical beliefs, and isolation. Oswald's background was troubled long before Dallas. He had defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, publicly declaring himself a Marxist, before becoming disillusioned and returning to the United States with a Russian wife. Back home, he drifted from job to job, struggled financially, and became increasingly obsessed with politics and ideology. He admired revolutionary figures and felt ignored, insignificant, and misunderstood. Many investigators later concluded that Oswald craved recognition more than anything else. At 12:30 p.m., as the motorcade passed below his window, shots rang out. From the 6th floor of the book depository, Oswald fired a rifle toward the president. President Kennedy was struck and mortally wounded. Texas Governor John Connally, riding in the same limousine, was also seriously injured. The chaos that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, the President of the United States was pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital. Oswald fled the scene. Less than an hour later, Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit stopped a man matching the suspect's description in a residential neighborhood. Witnesses reported that the man pulled a revolver and shot Tippit multiple times, killing him instantly. Oswald continued running, eventually slipping into the Texas Theater, where police arrested him after a brief struggle. When confronted by reporters, Oswald denied everything, famously saying, "I'm just a patsy." Over the next 2 days, Oswald became the focus of intense interrogation and global attention. Yet he was never formally tried, never faced a jury, and never publicly explained his motives. The lack of clear answers only fueled speculation. Then, on November 24, 1963, during a routine prisoner transfer in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters, the story took an even darker turn. In front of live television cameras, nightclub owner Jack Ruby stepped forward and shot Oswald point blank. Oswald died hours later, taking whatever secrets he held with him. The assassination, followed by Oswald's own murder, shattered public trust and gave rise to decades of conspiracy theories. Was Oswald acting alone, as the Warren Commission later concluded? Or was he part of a larger plot involving foreign governments, intelligence agencies, organized crime, or political rivals? Ballistics, eyewitness testimony, autopsy reports, and classified documents have been examined endlessly, yet doubts persist to this day. What makes Lee Harvey Oswald so haunting is not just what he did, but what was never resolved. He was a lone, troubled figure at the center of a world-changing event, killed before he could fully speak for himself. To some, he remains a solitary assassin driven by ideology and resentment. To others, he is a pawn in a much larger and darker story. More than 60 years later, the name Lee Harvey Oswald is inseparable from the assassination of John F. Kennedy. His actions ended a presidency, traumatized a nation, and opened a wound in American history that has never fully healed. The gunshots in Dealey Plaza echo far beyond Dallas, and at the center of it all remains a man who died as mysteriously as he lived, leaving behind questions that may never be fully answered. Number 2. Clyde Barrow. Clyde Barrow was one of the most notorious criminals of the Great Depression, a man whose life and crimes became wrapped in myth, romance, and misunderstanding. Born in 1909 into extreme poverty, Clyde grew up in a struggling family that drifted between farms and slums in North Texas, eventually settling near Dallas. The economic collapse of the late 1920s hit families like the Barrows especially hard, and for Clyde, crime quickly became less of a temptation and more of a way of life. Petty thefts, car break-ins, and burglaries marked his early years, long before his name would become nationally infamous. Clyde's path hardened after repeated arrests and time spent in brutal Texas prison farms, particularly Eastham Prison Farm, where inmates were routinely abused. Many historians believe this experience radicalized him. He emerged from prison angry, resentful, and obsessed with revenge against the system that had broken him. It was during this period that he met Bonnie Parker, a young waitress with dreams of poetry, fame, and escape from a dead-end life. Their relationship was immediate, intense, and ultimately lethal. Together, Clyde and Bonnie became the core of what was later known as the Barrow Gang, a loose and shifting group of criminals that included family members and close associates. During the early 1930s, they crisscrossed Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, and the Midwest, committing a string of armed robberies, burglaries, and murders. Despite popular belief, Clyde rarely targeted large banks. Most of the gang's crimes involved small stores and gas stations. What he lacked in financial success, he made up for in violence. Clyde Barrow was the gang's unquestioned leader and primary killer. Unlike the romantic image that later emerged in newspapers and films, Clyde was ruthless and methodical. He carried military-grade weapons, including Browning automatic rifles, and used them with deadly efficiency. Over the course of their crime spree, Clyde was responsible for the deaths of at least 9 police officers and several civilians. Law enforcement officers were not just obstacles to him, they were targets. His hatred for prison authorities drove him to plot attacks specifically aimed at killing guards and freeing inmates. Public perception, however, told a very different story. Photographs of Bonnie posing with guns and cigars, combined with Clyde's defiant attitude toward banks and law enforcement, turned the pair into folk heroes for a population crushed by unemployment and foreclosures. Newspapers glamorized their exploits, portraying them as rebellious lovers on the run. In reality, their life was harsh, paranoid, and constantly on the brink of collapse. They were almost always injured, hungry, and exhausted, sleeping in stolen cars and abandoned houses, knowing that capture would mean death. By 1934, authorities were determined to end the chase. Texas Ranger Frank Hamer, a legendary lawman, was assigned to track Clyde. Hamer studied Clyde's patterns, learned his routes, and coordinated with officers across state lines. On May 23, 1934, in rural Beanville Parish, Louisiana, law enforcement finally set a trap. As Clyde and Bonnie drove down a remote road, officers opened fire without warning. More than 100 bullets tore through their car in seconds. Both Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker were killed instantly, their bodies left riddled with gunfire. The violent ambush shocked the public but effectively ended one of America's most infamous crime sprees. In death, Clyde Barrow became a legend, immortalized in songs, books, and films. Yet behind the mythology lies a far darker truth. Clyde was not a Robin Hood figure or a misunderstood rebel. He was a hardened criminal whose anger and ambition fueled years of bloodshed and fear. Clyde Barrow's story is ultimately a reflection of desperation, brutality, and the destructive power of resentment. The Great Depression may have shaped the conditions that gave rise to his crimes, but it was his choices that left a trail of bodies across the American Midwest. The legend of Bonnie and Clyde endures, but at its center remains a man driven by violence, vengeance, and a relentless refusal to surrender. Number 3. David Koresh. David Koresh was a deeply polarizing and tragic figure, whose rise and fall culminated in one of the deadliest confrontations between American citizens and the federal government. Born Vernon Wayne Howell in 1959, Koresh grew up in instability, struggling academically and socially from a young age. He gravitated toward religion early, developing an intense fascination with the Bible, particularly the Book of Revelation. Over time, this fixation evolved into a belief that he alone could interpret God's will and unlock the secrets of the apocalypse. In the 1980s, Howell joined a small religious group known as the Branch Davidians, based at the Mount Carmel Center outside Waco, Texas. The group was an offshoot of Seventh-day Adventism and already held apocalyptic beliefs. Howell quickly asserted himself as a charismatic and authoritative figure, claiming divine revelations and gradually consolidating power. He He eventually changed his name to David Koresh, combining David, after the biblical King David, and Koresh, a Hebrew form of Cyrus, a conqueror chosen by God. To his followers, this name symbolized his role as a messianic figure. As Koresh's influence grew, so did his control over the lives of his followers. He preached that he was the final prophet, and that he alone could open the 7 seals of Revelation. He instituted strict rules within the compound, including forced marriages, the breaking up of families, and the claim that only he had the right to father children with the women in the group. Many adults surrendered their personal autonomy entirely, believing obedience to Koresh was obedience to God. By the early 1990s, Mount Carmel had drawn the attention of federal authorities. Reports surfaced alleging illegal weapons stockpiling, automatic firearms modifications, and child abuse within the compound. On February 28, 1993, agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, attempted to execute a search warrant at the property. What followed was a violent gun battle that erupted almost immediately. 4 ATF agents were killed, along with 6 Branch Davidians. The raid failed, and Koresh was wounded. The confrontation escalated into a 51-day siege, with the FBI taking control of the operation. The standoff became a national spectacle, broadcast daily across television networks. Negotiators attempted to reason with Koresh, who spoke calmly and intelligently, yet remained deeply entrenched in his apocalyptic worldview. He promised multiple times to surrender but repeatedly delayed, claiming God had instructed him to wait. Inside the compound were men, women, and dozens of children, all caught between faith, fear, and isolation. As the siege dragged on, conditions deteriorated. Power was cut, psychological pressure tactics were used, and tensions rose on both sides. Authorities feared that Koresh was becoming increasingly unstable, and that the children inside were in danger. On April 19, 1993, the FBI launched a final operation, deploying tear gas into the compound in an attempt to force the occupants out without gunfire. What happened next remains one of the most fiercely debated moments in modern American history. Fires broke out inside Mount Carmel, spreading rapidly through the structure. Within minutes, the entire compound was engulfed in flames. David Koresh died in the fire, along with 75 Branch Davidians, including more than 20 children. Some died from smoke inhalation, others from burns, and several from gunshot wounds, raising unresolved questions about the final moments inside. The Waco tragedy shocked the nation and left a permanent scar on public trust. Critics accused the government of excessive force and catastrophic decision-making, while officials argued that Koresh's manipulation and refusal to surrender made the outcome inevitable. Investigations followed. Lawsuits were filed, and congressional hearings attempted to assign responsibility. But no conclusion ever fully satisfied the public. David Koresh remains a symbol of the deadly intersection between unchecked authority, religious extremism, and state power. To his followers, he was a misunderstood prophet. To others, he was a manipulative cult leader who placed ideology above human life. The fire at Waco did more than end a siege. It ignited decades of debate about freedom, belief, and the limits of government intervention. Questions that still echo long after the smoke cleared from Mount Carmel. Number 4. Charles Whitman. Charles Whitman's rampage in Austin, Texas, stands as one of the earliest and most influential mass shootings in modern American history, a case that permanently altered how the nation understood public violence. Born in 1941, Whitman was raised in a strict and often abusive household. His father was domineering and violent, demanding perfection and obedience, while Whitman himself showed early signs of intelligence and discipline. He was an Eagle Scout, an accomplished pianist, and a promising student. To many, he appeared calm, polite, and reliable, someone who embodied stability rather than danger. Whitman later joined the U.S. Marine Corps, where he trained as a marksman and became highly proficient with firearms. Although he earned medals for his shooting ability, his time in the military was marked by emotional instability, disciplinary issues, and increasing anger. After leaving the Marines, he enrolled as an engineering student at the University of Texas at Austin, struggling academically and financially. Behind the scenes, Whitman's mental health was deteriorating. He suffered from violent intrusive thoughts, severe headaches, and mood swings that frightened even himself. In the months leading up to the attack, Whitman sought medical help and explicitly told doctors he was having thoughts of killing people from a tower. Despite these alarming admissions, no effective intervention occurred. He began keeping journals in which he described feeling overwhelmed by rage and confusion, repeatedly questioning what was wrong with his mind. On the night of July 31, 1966, Whitman committed his first murders. He went to his mother's apartment and killed her while she slept, later leaving a note claiming he had spared her future suffering. He then returned home and murdered his wife, Kathleen Whitman, stabbing her repeatedly. In another note, he expressed love for her and claimed he did not understand his own actions. These writings would later become chilling evidence of a man unraveling under psychological pressure. The next morning, August 1, 1966, Whitman packed a footlocker with weapons, ammunition, knives, food, and supplies. He climbed to the observation deck of the University of Texas main building tower, a place offering a clear, elevated view of the campus below. Shortly after reaching the top, he killed the receptionist and several visitors inside the tower. Then, stepping outside, Whitman began firing down onto the campus with sniper rifles. For 96 minutes, terror unfolded across the university grounds. Students and pedestrians were shot in open areas with no warning, many not even realizing where the gunfire was coming from. 14 people were killed, and 31 others were wounded, some permanently. The randomness and distance of the attack created confusion and fear, unlike anything most Americans had ever seen. Police initially struggled to respond, lacking protocols for an elevated sniper attack. Civilians even joined the effort, helping officers identify Whitman's position and provide aid to the wounded. Eventually, 2 Austin police officers reached the top of the tower. In a brief confrontation, Charles Whitman was shot and killed, ending the massacre. The silence that followed was heavy, leaving a stunned city and a traumatized campus in its wake. The aftermath raised disturbing questions. An autopsy revealed Whitman had a brain tumor pressing against the amygdala, a region associated with emotion and aggression. While doctors could not definitively link the tumor to his actions, it intensified debates about mental illness, neurological disorders, and violence. Whitman's own writings, in which he begged for his brain to be studied, added another haunting layer to the case. The Texas Tower shooting changed American law enforcement forever. It exposed the lack of preparedness for mass shootings and directly influenced the creation of modern SWAT teams and rapid response tactical units. It also marked a grim turning point in U.S. history, showing how a single individual could inflict mass casualties from a position of elevation and distance. Charles Whitman is remembered not only for the devastation he caused, but for the unsettling contradiction he represented. A disciplined, outwardly normal man, whose inner collapse resulted in extraordinary violence. His attack remains a chilling reminder that the warning signs of mass violence are often visible, yet tragically ignored, and that the consequences of inaction can be catastrophic. Number 5. Dean Corll. Dean Arnold Corll remains one of the most disturbing figures in American criminal history, not because of public spectacle or notoriety during his lifetime, but because of how completely his crimes unfolded in silence. For years he operated in plain sight in Houston, blending into the community while committing acts that would later be recognized as among the most extreme serial crimes in U.S. history. What makes the Corll case particularly haunting is not only the scale of the violence, but how long it went unnoticed, and how it ultimately came to light by sheer chance. Corll was born in 1939 and spent much of his early life moving between Texas, Indiana, and Colorado after his parents' divorce. He was described by those who knew him as quiet, polite, and unassuming. Nothing about his outward personality suggested danger. By the late 1960s, Corll had returned to Houston and was living with his mother, who owned a small candy manufacturing business. This business would later become central to Corll's public image, and his chilling nickname, the Candy Man. Because of the family candy factory, Coral was well known among neighborhood teenagers. He sometimes handed out free candy, offered rides, or allowed young boys to spend time at his home. In working-class areas of Houston, this behavior did not initially raise suspicion. He appeared generous, friendly, and harmless, exactly the kind of adult few people would question. This access allowed Coral to build trust over time, particularly with teenage boys who came from unstable homes or were seeking attention, money, or a sense of belonging. Behind this carefully maintained fade, Coral was committing a series of abductions and murders with the help of teenage accomplices. Two young men in particular, David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, played central roles in his crimes. Both were teenagers when they became involved, and both were drawn in through a mix of manipulation, coercion, and financial incentives. Coral paid them to bring other boys to him, often classmates, friends, or acquaintances from the neighborhood. The crimes typically took place in locations Coral rented or controlled, including apartments and a boat storage shed. These places became sites of extreme violence, though at the time, nothing about them outwardly suggested what was happening inside. Victims were lured with promises of parties, money, alcohol, or simply a place to hang out. Once inside, escape became nearly impossible. What is especially unsettling about the Coral case is how long it went undetected. During this period, dozens of teenage boys went missing in Houston. Many families assumed their sons had run away, a common belief at the time, particularly for young men from troubled households. Law enforcement agencies did not initially connect the disappearances, and no large-scale investigation linked them to a single perpetrator. Coral benefited from this fragmented response and the lack of communication between cases. Unlike many serial criminals, Coral never sought publicity. He did not taunt police, leave messages, or draw attention to himself. His goal was secrecy, control, and continuation. This allowed the crimes to escalate quietly over time. The true scale of what was happening would remain hidden until an unexpected break occurred, not through police work, but through internal collapse. That collapse came in August 1973. Elmer Wayne Henley, then still a teenager, had begun to fear that he himself might become a victim. Tensions between Henley and Coral increased, and during a confrontation at Coral's home, Henley shot and killed him. This single act abruptly ended the killings, but it also opened the door to a revelation few could have imagined. After Coral's death, Henley went to the police. What he told them initially sounded unbelievable. He described multiple murders, burial sites, and the involvement of accomplices. Investigators were skeptical at first, but as Henley led them to remote locations outside Houston, the scale of the crimes became undeniable. Shallow graves were uncovered at beaches and wooded areas, containing the remains of numerous victims. The discovery shocked Houston and the nation. Many of the missing boys had been gone for years, their families living with unanswered questions. Now those questions were replaced with devastating certainty. The investigation revealed that Coral had systematically killed dozens of young people over several years, making the case one of the largest serial murder investigations in U.S. history at the time. Public reaction was intense. Media coverage focused heavily on the contrast between Coral's harmless image and the reality of his crimes. The nickname the Candy Man, initially a reference to his family business, took on a deeply disturbing meaning. It became symbolic of how easily trust could be exploited and how predators could hide behind ordinary appearances. The case also raised difficult questions about accountability, particularly regarding Coral's accomplices. David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley were both convicted and sentenced to long prison terms. Debate continues over how to view their roles, whether as willing participants, manipulated teenagers, or both. Regardless, their involvement highlighted how Coral was able to extend his control beyond his own actions, turning victims into tools. From a broader perspective, the Coral case exposed significant failures in how missing persons cases were handled at the time. Many disappearances were not aggressively investigated, especially when victims were teenagers. In the years following, law enforcement agencies began to reevaluate procedures, improve data sharing, and take missing youth reports more seriously. Today, Dean Corll is remembered not because he sought infamy, but because his crimes forced a reckoning. They demonstrated how predators can operate within communities, how assumptions can delay justice, and how silence can allow horror to grow unchecked. The mass graves discovered after his death stand as grim evidence of what happens when warning signs are missed and vulnerable individuals are overlooked. The story of the Candyman is not just about one criminal. It is about the systems, social attitudes, and blind spots that allowed him to operate for so long. It remains one of the darkest chapters in Houston's history, and a reminder that the most dangerous threats are sometimes the ones that appear most ordinary. Number 6. Bernie Tiede. Bernhardt Bernie Tiede's story stands out in criminal history, not because of brutality or spectacle, but because of how deeply it challenges assumptions about who a criminal can be. In a genre often dominated by cruelty and malice, Tiede's case occupies a strange and uncomfortable middle ground, one where affection, manipulation, community loyalty, and murder coexist in a way that unsettled both the legal system and the town that knew him best. Carthage, Texas, is a small, close-knit community where reputations carry weight and everyone knows everyone else. In such towns, trust is often built over years of routine interactions, church gatherings, funerals, charity events, and quiet acts of kindness. Bernie Tiede thrived in this environment. By the mid-1990s, he was one of the most recognizable and well-liked figures in Carthage. Known for his warmth, generosity, and constant presence at community events, Tiede worked as an assistant mortician, a role that placed him at the emotional center of the town. He was frequently praised for his compassion toward grieving families, his gentle demeanor, and his willingness to go above and beyond to comfort others in moments of loss. People described him as kind, polite, attentive, and deeply involved in church activities. He sang in the choir, taught Sunday school, and volunteered his time freely. For many residents, Bernie was not just a helpful man, he was a moral constant. It was in this context that Bernie met Marjorie Nugent, an 81-year-old widow known in Carthage for her wealth and her difficult personality. Nugent was often described as controlling, abrasive, and demanding. She had strained relationships with many people in town, including family members. Over time, however, she developed a close bond with Bernie, who became her companion, assistant, and eventually her primary emotional support. Their relationship appeared mutually beneficial on the surface. Bernie provided companionship, attention, and care, while Nugent offered financial security and access to her wealth. He helped manage her affairs, accompanied her on trips, and gradually became deeply embedded in her daily life. According to later testimony, Nugent began exerting increasing control over Bernie, monitoring his spending, restricting his independence, and dictating many aspects of his behavior. This imbalance would later become central to Bernie's defense, but at the time, few people questioned the relationship. From the outside, it looked like an elderly woman relying on a trusted friend. Inside, however, the dynamic was becoming increasingly strained. In November 1996, that strain reached a breaking point. Bernie Tiede shot and killed Marjorie Nugent inside her home. There was no struggle, no public scene, and no immediate discovery. After killing her, Bernie placed Nugent's body in a freezer, where it remained hidden for approximately 9 months. What followed is what makes the case so unusual. During those 9 months, Bernie continued living his life almost exactly as before. He attended church, participated in community activities, and remained active in local social circles. At the same time, he accessed Nugent's financial accounts, using her money not for lavish personal indulgence, but for donations, gifts, trips, and community projects. He funded trips for church members, paid for performances, gave generously to local causes, and helped people in need. To many in Carthage, Bernie seemed more generous than ever. Because Nugent had been reclusive and unpopular, her absence did not immediately raise alarms. People assumed she was traveling or choosing to stay out of sight. Over time, however, suspicions grew. Eventually, authorities were alerted, and an investigation led to the discovery of Nugent's body in the freezer. Bernie did not deny responsibility. When confronted, he confessed to the killing. The legal case itself was relatively straightforward. He had killed her, concealed the body, and used her money without authorization. Under Texas law, the crime met the definition of first-degree murder. What was not straightforward was the reaction of the town. Instead of outrage, Carthage responded with overwhelming sympathy for Bernie. Many residents spoke openly about their dislike of Nugent and their affection for him. They described him as gentle, generous, and incapable of malice. Some argued that Nugent had emotionally abused Bernie, portraying him as a victim pushed beyond endurance rather than a calculating murderer. This reaction posed a serious problem for the justice system. Prosecutors became concerned that a local jury would be unable or unwilling to convict him fairly. As a result, the trial was moved to a different county in order to find an impartial jury not influenced by years of personal loyalty. During the trial, the defense emphasized Bernie's psychological state and the controlling nature of his relationship with Nugent. Expert testimony suggested he had a dependent personality, making him especially vulnerable to manipulation and emotional pressure. The prosecution, however, focused on the facts. Nugent was shot, her body hidden, and her money used without consent. Ultimately, Bernie Teed was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Yet even after the verdict, public sympathy did not disappear. Appeals followed, and years later, new arguments about jury instructions and psychological evidence led to a reevaluation of the case. Bernie was eventually released on bond for a period, while legal proceedings continued. A rare outcome for someone convicted of murder. The story gained national attention when it was adapted into the 2011 film Bernie, starring Jack Black. The film portrayed the case with a blend of dark humor and moral ambiguity, reflecting the real-life discomfort surrounding the question at the heart of the story. How should society judge someone who commits an unforgivable act, yet is widely perceived as kind and selfless? Bernie Tidy's case forces an uncomfortable confrontation with the idea that goodness and wrongdoing are not always opposites. He was not a shadowy figure hiding in isolation. He was trusted, admired, and embraced by his community. His crime was not driven by greed in the traditional sense, nor by notoriety or rage in public view. It unfolded quietly, behind closed doors, and remained hidden because no one expected him to be capable of it. Today, the case is studied not just as a criminal act, but as a social phenomenon. It highlights how community bias can complicate justice, how charisma can influence perception, and how moral judgments are shaped as much by emotion as by evidence. Bernie Tiede remains one of the most unsettling examples of how a person can be both deeply loved and undeniably guilty. Proof that the line between nice and dangerous is sometimes far thinner than anyone wants to believe. Number 7. Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was not a politician, a soldier, or a revolutionary. He was a nightclub owner, a man who lived on the edges of power without ever truly belonging to it. And yet, in a matter of seconds, he permanently altered one of the most scrutinized moments in American history. Born Jacob Leon Rubenstein in 1911, Ruby grew up in Chicago in a turbulent environment marked by instability and crime. His childhood was chaotic, shaped by neglect, frequent moves, and time spent in foster homes. As a young man, he drifted through various jobs, often operating in the shadowy overlap between legitimate business and organized crime. By the 1940s, Ruby had begun associating with figures connected to Chicago's criminal underworld, though his exact role was never clearly defined. He was not a high-ranking mob figure, but he was known, familiar, and useful. Eventually, Ruby relocated to Dallas, Texas, where he opened several nightclubs, most notably the Carousel Club. The club catered to police officers, journalists, entertainers, and local figures, offering discounted drinks and free entry to law enforcement. Ruby cultivated these relationships carefully. He craved approval and belonging, and the club became his gateway into the city's informal power networks. By the early 1960s, Ruby was a well-known character in Dallas. Not influential, but visible. He was frequently seen at police stations, press events, and public gatherings, often inserting himself where he did not strictly belong. He was known to be emotional, excitable, and deeply sensitive to perceived slights. Friends described him as generous and loyal, but also volatile and prone to dramatic reactions. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The city was thrown into chaos, shock, and international scrutiny. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested within hours for the murder of JFK and for the killing of Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit later that day. As news spread, Ruby became obsessed with the unfolding events. Over the next 2 days, Ruby was everywhere. He appeared at police headquarters repeatedly, sometimes slipping past security with ease due to his familiarity with officers. He was present during press conferences and questioned Oswald directly at one point, shouting at him in front of reporters. His behavior suggested agitation, emotional investment, and an inability to detach himself from the situation. On the morning of November 24, 1963, Ruby left his apartment and drove downtown. Before heading to police headquarters, he stopped at Western Union to wire money to one of his dancers. This detail would later become crucial, as it demonstrated that Ruby was not acting on an impulsive whim in the final seconds before the shooting, but had moved deliberately through the city. As Lee Harvey Oswald was being transferred from the Dallas City Jail to the county jail, the basement of police headquarters was filled with law enforcement and reporters. The event was being broadcast live on national television. As Oswald was led through the garage in handcuffs, Jack Ruby stepped forward from the crowd. Without hesitation, Ruby raised a revolver and fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The moment was captured on live television, broadcast instantly across the United States and around the world. Oswald collapsed. Police officers wrestled Ruby to the ground. Within hours, the man accused of killing the president was himself mortally wounded. 2 days later, Oswald died in the same hospital where Kennedy had been pronounced dead. In an instant, Jack Ruby became one of the most infamous figures in American history. Ruby claimed he acted out of grief and patriotism. He told authorities that he could not bear the thought of Jacqueline Kennedy being forced to return to Dallas for a trial. He described his act as one of compassion, driven by emotion rather than planning. Many early reports accepted this explanation at face value, portraying Ruby as a distraught citizen overcome by the magnitude of the tragedy. But almost immediately, doubts emerged. How had Ruby gained access to a secure police area? Why was he allowed so close to Oswald? Why had he been present at so many critical moments following the assassination? And perhaps most importantly, why did a man with known underworld connections kill the most important suspect in modern American history? These questions fueled decades of conspiracy theories. Investigations into Ruby's background revealed his long-standing associations with organized crime figures, both in Chicago and Dallas. Phone records showed calls to known mob-connected individuals in the days before the assassination. While no direct evidence ever proved he acted on behalf of a larger conspiracy, the circumstantial details refused to fade. Ruby himself became increasingly unstable after his arrest. While awaiting trial, his mental health deteriorated rapidly. He exhibited paranoia, emotional breakdowns, and delusional beliefs, including fears that he was being poisoned and that Jewish people would be slaughtered across America if he spoke openly. Psychiatrists later testified that he suffered from significant psychological disturbances. In 1964, Ruby was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. However, the conviction was overturned on appeal due to errors in the trial, including issues surrounding venue and jury influence. A new trial was ordered, but Ruby would never live to see it. In January 1967, Jack Ruby died of a pulmonary embolism caused by lung cancer. While still in custody, he died in relative obscurity, his final years marked by illness, isolation, and a mind increasingly detached from reality. The official investigations, including the Warren Commission, concluded that Ruby acted alone, driven by emotional instability and personal distress. Yet for many Americans, that conclusion has never fully satisfied the questions left behind. Ruby's action ensured that Lee Harvey Oswald would never stand trial, never testify, and never be cross-examined in open court. Whether intentional or not, Ruby permanently silenced the central figure in the assassination of a president. Jack Ruby occupies a unique place in criminal history. He did not plan a campaign of violence. He did not seek power or fame. He did not run from the scene or deny his actions. And yet, his single gunshot reshaped public trust in institutions, intensified suspicion toward official narratives, and embedded doubt into one of the most pivotal moments of the 20th century. He was not a mastermind, but he was not merely a bystander either. He was a man shaped by insecurity, emotional volatility, and a lifelong need to matter. In killing Oswald, he stepped into history, not as a hero, not as a villain in the traditional sense, but as a tragic figure whose actions deepened a national wound that has never fully healed.